Okay, this is JonMarc versus Eric. JonMarc's white, plays d4, d5, c4, e6. That's all fairly normal and good. e4's definitely a mistake. You don't want to just lose a pawn right there. And subsequently, JonMarc probably should have played knight c3, trying to get that pawn back. Instead, he plays d5, opening up the center a little bit. Here, Eric probably could have continued actually with bishop c5 because of the attack there on f2. For instance, bishop c5, pawn takes, bishop takes f2, and white can't take the bishop because of the threat against his queen on d1. So he's going to have to play king e2, which is going to get really kind of awkward for him. But e takes d5 is also, pretty good. He's still up a pawn. How should white recapture this pawn now on d5? Probably with queen takes d5, queen takes d5, c takes d5, knight f6, knight c3. Once, the center's opened up here and white's down a pawn, so trading queens would probably be a good idea. But instead he just takes with the pawn. And the difference now is after knight f6, knight c3, there's a lot of pressure on this d5 pawn with the black queen still sitting up there. At this point, maybe Eric should, challenge the pawn. For example, c6. And, if he takes the pawn, queen takes d1, knight takes, knight takes. Instead, though, he plays bishop b4, which has a real problem with it, is queen a4 check. And now the bishop's going to die. So here it would have been better probably play c6 or even knight bd7, bishop d6. But he plays bishop b4. But JonMarc doesn't see queen a4. He just defends with bishop d2. And now Eric should probably just castle. But he plays bishop g4. And so at this point, JonMarc's queen's under attack. And he looks, well, where can I move it? Queen a4 check. Works very well, winning that bishop on b4. And now at this point, the knight on e4 is under attack, or the pawn on e4. And so Eric should probably just, play c takes d, defending the pawn. Instead, he plays queen b6. And now that he's down a bishop, you really don't want to trade off, the queens when you're down material, because the queen's really your only hope of winning the game. And so, I might have just taken the queen. It's certainly a good move, but probably an even better move is knight takes e4. And cat's meowing at me, and you're up a pawn there. Oh, she's gonna throw up, I think. Yeah, she's gonna throw up on my shirt, it looks like. Well, I'll let her do that, but I'll continue making this video. Don't want to interrupt it. Yeah, she's throwing up right there. It's because she ate my bamboo. I told her not to eat the bamboo, but she did. Alright, so at this point, I think white should just take the pawn on e4. For some reason, though, he doesn't. He plays queen a3. Still doing good here, though, because white's up a bishop. And Eric captures there on d5. Probably the best way now to continue here is knight b5, because, you know, eventually you might play rook c1 or bishop f4, both of which are going to be hitting f7, and then that knight's going to be there ready to play into f7, and you're kind of threatening that fork, or at least threatening the rook. So knight b5 probably would have been good. JonMarc plays bishop b5, and that's just easily blocked with, you know, knight c6. It's all really Eric had to play there. Instead, though, he plays king d8, which is definitely a mistake. After knight takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop a5, and the queen is gone because of that pin right there. So you could definitely sack that knight on d5. Instead, though, bishop e3, which doesn't really do so well after d4. You could still play here, though, bishop takes d4 and queen takes, knight f3, and if he tries to take that knight, you got rook d1, which works really well there. And if he just, like, I don't know, moves the queen back to b6, yeah, you got like knight e5, which is looking really good. And you also got rook d1 check threat. And you got all that pressure kind of coming up in there. So bishop e3 isn't very good because of d4, but actually sacking the bishop on d4, white will still be winning this. JonMarc played rook d1, and I see the idea is, oh, that pawn on d4 is pinned, but, you know, bishop takes d1 is the problem. You know, it would have been better to take the pawn on d4, and then you can play rook d1 later. Rook d1, bishop takes. You recap. Now black is actually winning this, and probably the best way to play this for white would be bishop takes, queen takes, knight takes, and I mean black's still winning obviously, but you're up a pawn there because you take that d4 pawn. Instead, though, if you just take the bishop immediately, well, you lose your bishop too, and so this is much worse for white. Now, JonMarc played knight to h3, which allows e takes f2 check, and it also just allows queen takes b5 immediately. You know, probably the best way is e takes f2 and then recapture and then take the bishop. So knight h3 is really missing the fact that this queen is hitting on b5. Probably, need to, I don't know, play bishop a4 or bishop e2, something, get your bishop to safety. You also play queen a4, I guess. Knight h3, though, just loses a bishop. And if I had to guess what's kind of going on here psychologically, it's that JonMarc was winning. And I mean, this is what happens to me when I play. I'm winning, and then you get overconfident, and so then you played rook d1, bishop takes d1. Now you lost the rook and you're losing, and now when you start losing, it's really easy to just start making more mistakes when you actually need to be like, okay, I'm losing, I need to be more careful. And so knight h3 is a good example of just, making your position worse. Here, white could just take that pawn. That would probably be the best move here. Instead, he goes a queen d6 check. And it's really easy for black to just play queen d7 and defend. You don't want to trade your queen here, JonMarc, because you're losing. And once the queens are off the board, it's going to be a lot easier for black to just sort of simplify the position and win. Queen takes, knight recaptures, knight takes pawn, king e7, castle, rook hc8, knight f5 check, king f8, knight d6 attacking the rook, but the rook just comes down to c2. Rook tries to defend there on b1, knight e8, and here, yeah, you take the pawn on b7, and that's not so good because it's going to allow rook b8, and that's just going to increase pressure down there. Just as easily, you could have simply just taken the pawn on e4, but, I mean, white's losing this kind of regardless of what he does. He's down 6 points. Knight takes b7, rook b8, b3, rook takes knight. You don't really want to lose your knight there. Knight a5 probably is what you needed to play. So now you're down a knight. I mean, this game's over. Rook e1, rook takes a2, and I see your idea with rook e1 was to take on e4, but that's just checkmate. So you definitely, I mean, didn't want to do that, and you didn't want to lose that pawn on a2, but I mean, there's not a whole lot you can do to save it. Probably you can play rook a1, but you're still losing here. So just to, I guess, kind of summarize now, that's dumb. Don't do that. Don't. Let me get rid of this. There. Wait, what did I do? Yeah. Don't just lose your pawn there. And you both need to see queen a4 check right there. Right here, probably just want to take that pawn. Bishop b5 check. It's just easily blocked by the knight. This would have been a lot more aggressive, playing that knight up into there on b5. And obviously here, Eric, you don't want to play king d8, knight c6 for sure. Right here, um, bishop takes is a sacrifice that really works pretty well. Let's look at that again. Bishop takes, queen takes, and really the brilliant move here now is knight f3, which cuts that bishop attack on d1. And so now you're really threatening rook d1. Knight takes. Knight h3 is just bad. Loses the bishop. And here, I mean, this is already lost now for white because of rook d1. But at the very least, if you have a choice between two pawns you can recapture, take the one that is not going to give him an attack by after rook b8. And then finally, of course, let's all realize that this is checkmate. Checkmate right there. Okay.